Hi, everyone. You've probably heard the phrase, there's too many cooks in the kitchen. Well, this, of course, refers to the idea that too many people working together on something may cause problems, and the final result might be confusing at best or a big mess at worst. Well, last year at one of our meetings, Jacob asked the elders a simple question. How are decisions made at First Christian Church? And as we considered the various decisions that were being made or considered at the time, it became clear that there was not an obvious answer. Some committees were making decisions, others were waiting for staff approval, still others were expecting Jacob to hear all the issues and then make a decision, and still others were bringing every decision to the board for vote. And in the end, the whole process was really confusing and problems were arising. Like decisions were not being communicated widely, or sometimes Jacob didn't know what authority he had to make certain decisions. Sometimes the staff were left to carry out decisions that they didn't have any part in planning. And a lot of times, problems were identified, but nothing was happening because it wasn't clear who was supposed to pick up the baton and run with it, who was supposed to make that decision. So, in the meantime, board meetings were spent really talking about day-to-day tasks, and that's probably not the, purview of a general board. And committees were a bit confused as to whether they should report every minor detail of what they're doing or if it should be something different, because that just seems sort of long and unnecessary. So, with all this in mind, Jane Worsley, our board moderator at the time, put together a group to think about church structure and how decisions are and should be made. And at first, the group offered to examine our current structure. Let's figure out what we are doing, what it does look like. And so we looked at the current bylaws. And while some things are very clear, like how a lead minister is called, other things are not. Like ultimately, who should decide what is done during a worship service? Or what should a new office job description look like? Or even something as simple as what color do we paint the walls in the nursery? The current process is a bit of a mess with too many cooks in the kitchen. And when we tried to draw it out, there were a lot of boxes and a lot of arrows. So we noticed that sometimes decisions were even made more than once with different groups, and they weren't communicating well with each other. And there was a lack of clarity as to who really has the final authority to make a decision when it's not a unanimous agreement. So we noted that our general board also is really huge. It's probably too big to be effective. And honestly, we have pretty low expectations for attendance and participation. And we noted that board members who are super knowledgeable and concerned about particular ministries, which is great, but there's a lack of being accountable to common goals or making decisions with the larger church mission in mind. And then finally, we noted that this all hands on deck board structure might have been fine for a smaller church of about 150 to 200 people. But with the way we are growing and our mission to welcome all and to be one, our current structure is holding us back. We need to clearly identify decision makers and make decisions more quickly. And we need to empower our minister and our staff to dream and strategize and move us ahead toward our mission of one. So, with these problems identified, a subgroup met to dig into several books and articles about potential church structure and high impact boards, what to do to streamline our decision making, and to ensure that we stay mission focused. And we learned a lot from this exercise, which was a good 6 months. And today I just want to share with you the results of this working group. First, we landed on a specific model that seems really promising. It's outlined in much greater detail than I can give here in a book called Winning on Purpose. And copies of this book are available in our church library. So if you want to dig in deeper and see why we think this should be our church structure, please do. We also have copies of the proposed bylaw changes that state the new structure, and that's what I want to move through today. So first of all, I want to assure you that none of us are wanting to change the bylaws for no reason. We were very careful about not fixing anything that isn't broken. And so, for example, Articles 1 through 3, our name, our purpose, our membership, those just had very minor wording changes just to update language and clarify a few things, but no real substantial changes were made to those articles. It's Article 4, where we start talking about the board and the officers, that things are changing dramatically with this new proposed structure. As you may know, our current officers are elected from the congregation. We have a moderator, a vice moderator, a secretary, and a treasurer. And the general board consists of these officers, all the elders, all the deacons, all the trustees, and all the chairs of all of our various standing committees and ministry teams, plus the chief officers of CMF, CWF, and CYF for the youth groups. Whew, that's about 40 to 50 people. The size is too big, really, for efficient governing, and most people aren't even really involved in board meetings. The 1 year terms are really short and not really long enough to do strategic planning or to think about long term mission. And each current committee or department is listed in the bylaw as an officer or, a board member. And so it makes adding or changing ministry departments and ministry teams an act of changing the bylaws, which is a bigger deal. And finally, it's set up to be more of a reporting board. Tell us what you did and what you're going to do next month. And it's not really a forward focused, like a mission focused board working toward accountable leadership and toward a larger church mission. So let me show you what we propose as our new structure. And I want to do this by just sharing my screen and showing you parts of the changes and just highlighting a few things. Okay, so I have on my screen a copy of the proposed bylaw changes. And as mentioned, Article 1, Article 2, and Article 3 have just minor editorial wording changes. So I'm going to skip right on down to the structure changes for the board that we are proposing. Article 4 is Leadership Board and Officers. So first notice that we are suggesting a change in name from General Board to Leadership Board. And in this new model, proposed model, the membership of the board would be comprised of 9 elected church members. And the lead minister would serve on the board as an ex officio board member, as that person does now. So in order to become a board member, anyone in the congregation can submit a signed letter recommending either themselves, kind of a self-nomination, or they can nominate others of good character and commitment. And what would have to happen then or prior to is that they will have completed a training course in servant leadership. And so these servant leadership courses would be offered periodically throughout the year, and the lead minister would run these and cover things like, basic principles of our beliefs and the mission and vision of our church and the structure of our church. So this would give everybody kind of like we're all on the same page in what we believe and what we're about. Potential board members would also have to sign a covenant that just says that they uphold the highest standards of participation in the church, service to the church, that they promise to support the minister and the mission, and tithing in regard to the church. So that would just be a covenant that they would sign. So once that pool of candidates is determined, then the lead minister would present them to the board for selection of who is going to fill the open slots. So if we have 3 open positions and 3 people interested, then great, But if we have the good problem of having 10 people interested in only 3 open positions, in that case, the board would just think about, well, who's already on the board and what expertise is represented. And so having served on a school board, I can say this is really common. If somebody is the treasurer of the board and they are rotating off the board for some reason, then we would be sure to look for somebody who has expertise in financial planning or financial understandings. And then that way we would be filling that gap on the board. It could be that you have that covered, but you're really looking as a board to kind of extend our community outreach, our name in the community. And so maybe you're going to select somebody who has particularly good community connections. I mean, it could be anything, but the board will hopefully be thinking about what's already represented and what needs to be represented to make the board as representative as possible. The moderator would then present the final selection of candidates to the congregation for final approval. And the board terms, instead of 1 year, they would be 3 years. And so this offers enough time to really understand the processes of the board and to go through some strategic planning and to see some projects through and to really work toward that mission focus that we're trying to get toward. There would be an option to renew for an additional 3-year term, but after that, we would want people to step down from the board and give others an opportunity to serve. We would stagger these 3-year terms so that not everybody is rotating off at the same time. And then, of course, if somebody can't complete it, we would fill that position for the remainder of the term. So the other thing that's different then is what these people are really doing on the board. So instead of talking about each and every committee and the day to day operations, the leadership board would be much more concerned with kind of bigger picture, like the vision, the governance, the policy, the budget, the overall programming that's going on. So they would still receive reports from the minister and staff and officers about what's going on with the different committees, but it would be doing that in terms of like, well, how is this meeting our mission? So all the legal business matters, of course, would be the priority of the board, and when necessary, they could call a search committee to do for the purpose of calling a lead minister if that was needed. So probably one of the biggest changes is that the leadership board in this model would write and adjust a living set of guiding principles. And there are three primary principles that would be developed: mission principles, boundary principles, and accountability principles. So, in short, the mission principles are, as you would expect, the mission of the church. And so it's really important that we all come together as a board, as a leadership board, to decide, why are we here? What is the mission of our church? And so this is a good outline or direction for the lead minister of, what are the essential outcomes for which we exist? This is why we're here. This is what we want you to work on. They would also write and adjust a living set of boundary principles. And so essentially, we would say to the lead minister and the staff, you can be creative in figuring out how to achieve this mission as long as you're operating within these boundaries. So, for example, within this budget and whatever other boundaries you want to put in place. And then finally, we would have a set of accountability principles. So what are we accountable for? What are the outcomes that we are expecting at the end of this? And so the board is, of course, accountable to God first and foremost. But the accountability of the board to itself is also important. So we want to make sure that we're have integrity in the work that we're doing, and that the lead minister is accountable to the board for not only fulfilling the mission, but respecting those boundary principles. So there's other things that the board would do, such as annual evaluations of the lead minister, promising to actively support the minister towards that mission, and then things like the annual budget, which is a typical job of the board. Because we're not worried about the everyday, day-to-day decision making, we are suggesting that this type of board might be able to meet quarterly and get their job done. So you can always meet more often than that. You can always call special meetings. But we think that with quarterly meetings, you could probably accomplish this, especially if each quarterly meeting had a specific focus. Like this one is always for budget, and this one is always for nominations, and this one is always for, reviewing the guiding principles, etc. So in terms of rules of order and corporate duties, we didn't change any of that from the current bylaws. Officers, we still have the same set of officers: a moderator, a vice moderator, a secretary, and the treasurer. The difference here in this model is that instead of those four people being elected directly from the congregation as a whole, they would be elected within the board. So the board would be elected from the congregation, those 9 people. And then once those 9 people are in place for a year, for that given year, they would decide among themselves who is going to serve as moderator that year, who's going to serve as vice moderator, secretary, and treasurer. So those would be determined within the board. Otherwise, the responsibilities haven't changed from the previous version, with a few exceptions. The secretary in this model takes a little bit more of a role besides keeping the minutes of the meetings. They also maintain all of the guiding principles. And so it's important that they have copies of those, that people can access those if they need to see them, and that they are keeping that on schedule in terms of, okay, it's time to review and revise these. The treasurer, the role doesn't necessarily change, but we noticed as a committee that we have a chair of finance committee and we have the treasurer of the board. And these are 2 different people right now. And we were kind of wondering why we aren't sure, why are these 2 different people? Are they doing the same things, or who's supposed to do what? And so we thought it might make more sense to have the treasurer of the board be the automatic chair of the finance committee. So you have a nice link then between the committee and what they're doing and the board and what they're doing. The lead minister is a non-voting ex officio member of the leadership board and shall envision and inspire it. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're proposing for a structure change in terms of the board. Then if you notice that we took out the next article, which was pastor's cabinet, and we felt that it wasn't really necessary to have a separate pastor's cabinet in addition to a general board, that the leadership board as proposed could fulfill all those duties. The next article then becomes elders, deacons, and trustees. And we did not change anything here in terms of the definitions or the responsibilities. We are just suggesting in section B that the qualifications be the same as the board. So in other words, people who want to be elders, deacons, and trustees should also go through the servant leader training and sign the covenant. Okay, and that brings us to Article 6, Ministers and Staff. The Section A is the lead minister. One thing we changed is it used to say pastor, and we changed all the references from pastor to minister. And otherwise, we did not change anything from the current bylaws in terms of selection and termination. All of that part is the same. What we did change is the responsibilities section. So I want to read this because it's a bit different than what was there. The lead minister is the leader of the church, both spiritually and organizationally. He or she communicates vision and message to the congregation aimed to mobilize God's people to action in God's love, truth, and purposes. The lead minister, in collaboration with the Staff Relations Committee, hires and directs the staff in managing ministry operations. As an ex officio member of the board, the lead minister is the visionary leader, working with the board in crafting guiding principles, articulating the mission, the boundaries, and accountability. So a little bit different and a little bit more responsibility in a sense. And you can see that we're trying to have a more collaborative role between the lead minister and the Staff Relations Committee. So again, this part did not change. I'm going to go all the way down to Section B, which simply said other staff in the current model. And it was one line. And so we changed this one quite a bit just to add to it. So other ministerial staff, the lead minister, in collaboration with Staff Relations Committee, will determine what staff are needed to carry out the ministry plan. They'll create job descriptions and hire the staff. And so with this more collaborative nature, the lead minister would be the automatic chair of the Staff Relations Committee. So ultimately, the lead minister is the one in charge of fulfilling the mission. And so that person needs to have more of a say in who is working with him or her, who's on staff to help achieve this mission of the church. So hiring, termination, all of that would be done with lead minister working in collaboration with the Staff Relations Committee. Okay, so that's a little bit different, but not too far off. Article 8 is the departments. The only thing that's changed here is in our current edition of the bylaws, we name every department that currently exists. So we have Christians in Action, we have Christian Education, etc. And so what we wanted to do with this revision is to just take out any specific names of departments. And so we still are going to have departments and we're going to have ministry teams, but in the bylaws, you'd have to do a bylaw change anytime you added a new group or changed the name of a group. And so same with the constituencies, we're still going to have CMF and CWF. We just didn't want to specifically name those groups because, for example, CYF no longer goes by CYF. They've changed their name into some different youth groups and names. So we don't want to have to change the bylaws every time we want to make a ministry change like that. So we thought we'll keep everything about the different departments and constituencies in terms of how they're established and what their purpose is. We just don't want to name them each and every one specifically, so we have more flexibility as we're moving through our ministry plans. Okay. And then we do have some standing committees that we did want to specifically name. These are the ones that we don't think would change as our ministry plans change. We have a nominating committee, a staff relations committee, which we mentioned, and a finance committee, which we've mentioned. So the nominating committee, much like they do now, would be the committee would be put together or named by the moderator of the board each year to nominate candidates for open positions in the areas of elders, deacons, trustees, and the standing committees, staff relations and finance. So otherwise, we did not change anything about that process except that we added email and electronic means of notification. Okay. And then staff relations committee is, again, we didn't change much about what they do. 5 members, 3-year terms, staggered. But what we did suggest here with the revision is that the lead minister is the automatic chair of the staff relations committee. And so that has to be a more symbiotic relationship. And then we have the finance committee. And again, we didn't change any of the duties or procedures here except to name the treasurer of the board as the automatic chair of the finance committee. Okay, so that's it. In a nutshell, that's the changes. We didn't make any changes to the policy manual or to the amendments, with the exception of mentioning email and electronic means of communication. So just those kind of minor updating of language to catch the more current ways that we're communicating. So I hope that that helps to explain what we're trying to propose with this new bylaws change, which is really trying to do a structure change in terms of how our board operates. And that's really it in a nutshell. And I know it's a lot to take in, and we would greatly appreciate if all board members took a very careful reading of the proposed bylaws. We're going to create lots of opportunities for us to all talk and ask questions and suggest ideas and changes to discuss the model. And, we would do that before we would ever call for a vote. In fact, we hope to put together some sort of frequently asked questions type document so that we can share that and share our ideas and thoughts. And as stated in our bylaws, in order for any changes to occur to our bylaws, it requires a majority vote of the board and then a majority vote of the congregation. So we asked at this point that each board member review this proposal and just let us know what you think. So to close, I'm going to share a few quotes that I thought were relevant. The first one is from Roy Disney, and he says, "It's not hard to make decisions when you know what your values are." And so we thought that was a good illustration of the fact that if we are more mission focused, then our decision making is going to be more clear. And the second one is from somebody named Anso Koitzer, who I actually don't know who that is, but I really liked the quote. It said, "Decisions become easier when your will to please God outweighs your will to please the world." So I hope that that was informative, and that if you have any questions, you'll feel free to reach out to our group and we can help try to describe the changes we made and why we made those decisions. So thanks for your attention, and I'll see you all soon.